Chapters 5 through 8 of the Gospel according to Mark, from the American Bible Union's New Testament. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mark Penfold. Chapters 5 through 8 of the Gospel according to Mark. Chapter 5. And they came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling in the tombs. And no one could any longer bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been torn asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, and no one could tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the tombs, and in the mountains, crying out and cutting himself with stones. But seeing Jesus afar off, he ran and bowed down to him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, "What have I to do with thee, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God, do not torment me." For he said to him, "Come forth, unclean spirit, out of the man." And he asked him, "What is thy name?" And he says to him, "My name is Legion, because we are many." And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. And there was there by the mountain a great herd of swine feeding, and all the demons besought him, saying, "Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them." And immediately Jesus gave them leave, and coming out, the unclean spirits entered into the swine. And the herd rushed down the steep into the sea, about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they who fed them fled, and reported it in the city and in the country. And they came to see what it was that was done. And they come to Jesus, and see him who was possessed with demons, sitting, clothed, and in his right mind, him who had the legion. And they were afraid. And they who saw it related to them how it befell him who was possessed with demons, and concerning the swine. And they began to beseech him to depart from their borders. And as he was entering into the ship, he that had been possessed with demons besought him that he might be with him. And he suffered him not, but says to him, "Go into thy house to thy friends, and announce to them how great things the Lord has done for thee, and had compassion on thee." And he departed, and began to publish in the Decapolis how great things Jesus did for him, and all wondered. And Jesus, having passed over again in the ship to the other side, a great multitude was gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And there comes one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet, and besought him much, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. I pray thee come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed and live." And he went with him, and a great multitude was following him and thronging him. And a certain woman, who had a flow of blood 12 years, and had suffered much by many physicians, and spent all that she had, and was not at all benefited, but rather grew worse, hearing of Jesus, came in the crowd behind, and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I shall be made whole." And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she perceived in her body that she was healed of that plague. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone forth from him, turned about in the crowd, and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me?" And he looked around to see her who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done to her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, thy faith has made thee whole. Go in peace, and be healed of thy plague." While he was yet speaking, they come from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying, "Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the teacher any further?" And Jesus, overhearing the word that was spoken, says to the ruler of the synagogue, "Be not afraid, only believe." And he suffered no one to follow with him, save Peter and James, and John the brother of James. And they come to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and he sees a tumult, and those who wept and wailed greatly. And entering in, he says to them, "Why do ye make a tumult and weep? The child is not dead, but is sleeping." And they laughed him to scorn. But he, putting them all out, takes the father of the child, and the mother, and those who were with him, and enters in where the child was. And taking the hand of the child, he says to her, "Talitha cumi," which is interpreted, "Damsel, I say to thee, arise." And straightway the damsel arose, and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them strictly that no one should know this. And he commanded that something should be given her to eat. Chapter 6. And he went out from thence, and came into his own country, and his disciples follow him. And when the Sabbath was come, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many hearing were astonished, saying, From whence has this man these things? And what is the wisdom which is given him, and such miracles wrought by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and Joses, and Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they were offended at him. And Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country, and among his own kindred, and in his own house. And he was not able to do any miracle there, save that he laid his hands on a few sick and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about the surrounding villages, teaching. And he called to him the 12, and began to send them forth by 2 and 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits, and commanded them that they should take nothing for the way, save a staff only, no bread, no bag, no money in their girdle, but that they be shod with sandals, and put not on 2 coats. And he said to them, Wherever ye enter into a house, there abide till ye depart from thence. And whatever place shall not receive you nor hear you when ye depart thence, shake off the dust under your feet for a testimony to them. And they went out and preached that men should repent. And they cast out many demons, and anointed with oil many that were sick, and healed them. And the king Herod heard of it, for his name was spread abroad. And he said, John the Immerser is risen from the dead, and therefore do these powers work in him. Others said, It is Elijah. And others said, It is a prophet, like any one of the prophets. But Herod, hearing of it, said, John, whom I beheaded, is risen from the dead. For he, Herod, sent forth and laid hold of John, and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, the wife of Philip, his brother, because he had married her. For John said to Herod, It is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. And Herodias was angry with him, and desired to put him to death, and she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he observed him, and hearing him did many things, and heard him gladly. And a convenient day having come, when Herod on his birthday made a supper for his nobles, and for the chief captains, and the first men of Galilee, and the daughter of Herodias having come in and danced, it pleased Herod and those reclining at table with him. And the king said to the damsel, Ask of me whatever thou wilt, and I will give it to thee. And he swore to her, Whatever thou shalt ask of me, I will give it thee, unto the half of my kingdom. And she, going out, said to her mother, What shall I ask? And she said, The head of John the Immerser. And straightway she came in with haste to the king, and asked, saying, I will that immediately thou give me on a platter the head of John the Immerser. And the king became very sorrowful, but for the sake of his oath, and of those reclining with him, he would not reject her. And immediately the king sent one of the guard, and commanded to bring his head. And he went and beheaded him in the prison, and brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the damsel, and the damsel gave it to her mother. And his disciples, hearing of it, came and took up his corpse, and laid it in a tomb. And the apostles gathered together unto Jesus, and they reported to him all things, both what they did and what they taught. And he said to them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place, and rest awhile. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they departed into a desert place by ship, privately. And they saw them departing, and many knew them, and ran together there on foot from all the cities, and came before them. And going forth he saw a great multitude, and had compassion on them, because they were as sheep having no shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. And the day being now far spent, his disciples come to him, and say, The place is desert, and the time is now far past. Dismiss them, that they may go away into the surrounding fields and villages, and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. He answering said to them, Give ye them to eat. And they say to him, Shall we go and buy 200 denaries worth of bread, and give them to eat? He says to them, How many loaves have ye? Go and see. And when they knew, they say, 5, and 2 fishes. And he commanded them to make all lie down by companies on the green grass. And they lay down in ranks by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, he looked up to heaven, and